Greetings and welcome to the Quest for Wisdom podcast, where we search for nuggets of wisdom from the lives of some truly amazing people. Today's guest is James Regal. James is a stand-up comedian and producer who now runs the Barcelona Comedy Roast Battle, which is part of the International Roast Battle League. If you're confused about what a roast battle entails, then check the links in the description now. He also runs a show called Fake Jews, which he is taking to Edinburgh Fringe this year. Today we talk about why there is so much pleasure in insulting people on stage, cancel culture, Jews in comedy, epigenetics, and ancient civilizations. James is a hard-working and passionate human who is constantly on the rise. I hope you enjoy our conversation as much as I did. Finally, if you like the show, then please like, follow, or subscribe on whichever platform you're using. Welcome, James Regal, to the 11th episode of the Quest for Wisdom podcast. How does that make you feel?
Makes me feel great. Thanks very much for inviting me on, man. This is exciting.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you here. So you are a comedian, you are a show organizer, you are a PR freelancer person, and you are also now the host or co-host of the Barcelona Roast Battle, which has now been in the World Roast Battle League.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm sorry, am I totally butchering all of these accolades?
You were pretty much nearly there. So I don't co-host the show in terms of on stage. I produce the show with a couple of other guys, and then occasionally also do some of the roast battles in it. And yeah, the global thing. So it's cool. So Roast Battle is for those who are listening who maybe don't know, it's a style of comedy show where two comedians go on stage and they make really mean jokes about each other. But they're not kind of enemies. Like the best roasts are when you're up there with someone you really like or even love, because the audience can see it. You know, the meanness is coming from a place of love, much like, you know, you would be having banter with your mates in the pub or wherever. So, you know, it's a concept that anyone can do, and I decided to start doing them here in Barcelona around about a year ago, actually. We weren't the first. There was some other kind of quite infrequent versions, but I wanted to do something a bit more kind of creative with it. So we did it, and then about 5-6 months in, someone suggested that we contact the kind of original creators of Roast Battle in LA and just tell them what we're doing, you know, show them some videos, some pictures. And it just so happened at the time that they have like a global league, which is mostly US cities, but also they had London and Tokyo kind of competing against each other. They send in their best battles to this YouTube show, and then the presenters there, like, they give them different scores and create a league table. So they said, look, we're actually looking to expand the league by a few cities. There's a few cities in the running. We'd love you guys to just keep sending us footage of your shows, send us your battles. So we did for about another 6 months, and then at the beginning of this year, they told us we'd love to have you in the league. What that means really is that's now providing a really great platform for the comedians here in Barcelona to have their jokes amplified. They get a lot of views on Instagram because they're reshared by the global Roast Battle brand. We obviously get featured on this YouTube show. So it's really kind of just growing everything here. And we've actually got one, I think it would be long gone by the time this comes out, but we're doing a Roast Battle Barcelona versus London event this coming week as we're speaking now. So yeah, our first kind of international event. So yeah, it's really fun stuff.
Where are you from in the UK?
I'm from London, North London specifically.
So will you be rooting for London or Barcelona?
Well, I'm on Team Barcelona, so 100%.
Controversial.
Yeah,
controversial. He's going against his roots.
Yeah, listen, I've not lived there for 9 years. I'm fully in with Barcelona now. But yeah, it is. I guess it is kind of funny because it'd be two Londoners basically on stage taking the piss out of each other. But yeah.
Well, that's going to be very exciting. And I would say to people, anyone listening now, I'll put a link in the whatever description you're reading on whatever platform you're on. I'll put a link. I would say pause it, watch some of the clips on Instagram, so you know what a roast is on about if you don't know it. The clips are very funny. I've seen a lot of them. And it is amazing because it really is giving people huge exposure now. You know, Barcelona even though it's got a lot of people in it, it's still fairly small. The scene is still very small, and you still see the same type of people around. And getting that international exposure, I think, is just, it'll launch certain people, it'll launch certain people's careers. It'll get them just such an amazing level of exposure. I think it's just such a cool opportunity, and I don't know, it's an amazing, it's a stepping stone. Like when I first joined the sort of creative scene a few years ago, just like a little bit of storytelling, poetry, whatever, the scene was so small then, so tight knit, and it's slowly growing a little bit. You know, with the Comedy Clubhouse now, everybody's got a hub basically to, anyone can really run an event if they want. And you see the same people, but you also get a ton of tourists coming in, and it's like it's growing. And all the creative people that are just dotting around, hopelessly writing things and not knowing what to do with it, now they've got a little place to do it, and I think it's so cool. So I'd say thank you for presenting this opportunity to people, because it's wicked.
Yeah, it's fantastic. You know, you said it's great for the individuals involved, but it's also great for the scene in general. I think when we see visiting comedians come here for the first time, particularly the Americans or even the British ones, they don't realize how developed our comedy scene is here now. It's great. And, you know, whether that's local people like Catalan people, Spanish people that are doing comedy in English, or, you know, expats, or, you know, people that have moved here recently that are of a really pro level, the likes of Tamer Katan, for instance, Michelle Wolf even, you know, really, really strong comics here. There's so many shows now every week in English. It's nice to be able to do our little bit just to show this kind of roast audience that, hey, you know, Barcelona's got some real talent in general, and you know, they should come here and do shows of their own if they're comedians watching it. So
yeah, I think it's really cool that, like, obviously most people are at obviously some people have been doing it for a few more years, but most people are still at the start of their careers, because most people are below 40 at least. But then I've just read Billy Connolly's autobiography, and now I'm reading Jimmy Carr's, his like self-help book. I'm not a huge fan of Jimmy Carr's one at the moment. I think it's a bit boring, to be honest. Billy Connolly's was pretty interesting and just like seemed more authentic. Jimmy Carr's seemed a bit just like a money grab to me. It's meant to be like a self-help through a comedian, and I feel like someone's offered him money to do the book, and he's just done it half-heartedly, really.
Yeah, well, he's got all that tax to pay back.
He's got all that tax to pay back, yeah. But
allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly. But like he mentions in it, and the same with Billy Connolly, you know, Jimmy Carr mentions like knocking around the scene and seeing like, I can't remember the names, but, you know, it's like seeing some well-known comedians. They were just like hanging out in the same spots because they started at the same time. And then you hear like, you know, Joe Rogan talking about when he's like back in the day hanging around the scene, whatever, and just like all the famous comics are hanging around together and then end up being famous. And it's like, here within this scene, I didn't realize, for example, how famous Michelle Wolf was. I've not watched that much comedy in my life. I'm starting to now, but I didn't realize how famous she was. I saw a clip of her tagged or something, and then went on her Instagram. She's got like 500,000 followers. She's here like regularly performing. And then when they said that they put like in the clubhouse here, when they said that Louis C.K. had come to visit, I thought they were joking. You know, like I thought it was just like, oh, come to Show Up, Go Up, which is meant to be for like mainly amateurs really, and beginners who are going to practice like crap material basically. And then they were like, oh, Louis C.K. turned up, and I was like, aha, good one. And then I saw a picture of him hung up in the clubhouse. I was like, oh my God, like, because it is Barcelona. It's a major city, and these people are going to come here at some point. And if they do, and they type in comedy clubhouse is going to come up, and then you are going to get more people. And as the scene gets more established, people are going to specifically come here instead of going to places like London or New York or something where the scene is like long standing. So I think it's so cool to be here at like that tipping point where it's becoming like more mainstream, really.
Yeah, and I think in the long term, my hope is that Barcelona becomes almost like the comedy capital of mainland Europe anyway. And then in terms of Spain, it becomes a hub, because I do some gigs in Ibiza sometimes. There's a big British expat community there. They have no comedy, and certainly in the winter, there's absolutely bugger all to do because everything in Ibiza is shut. It's so seasonal. I just did a show there this week, and I bring some comedians from here. I bring some comedians over from the UK. But quite often what I try and do is say, like, hey, like, come into Barcelona, do a show in Barcelona, then we'll fly to Ibiza and then fly home from there. I think that's the start of something where we should be able to connect all these towns along the coast of Spain, that's, you know, whether they're expat towns or tourist towns, all the way down to kind of Alicante and Malaga. That I'd love that to become almost like a circuit. So, you know, a touring comic can come in, do Barcelona a couple of nights, and then do like almost a week of shows throughout the rest of Spain. And we can somehow facilitate that, because then it becomes a lot more worth their while to make that trip and get like good money for it. Because that's the one thing that's missing here really, is the money. When you compare to, you know, shows if you headline a show in London, even if you're kind of just a kind of touring comic of 5 years, you can get 200, 300 quid. And like no one's getting paid that much here unless it's a corporate event. The money's, it's still more about the art than the money, which is beautiful. But I think over time, as we build our audience and that kind of thing, I think we'll start to see better paid gigs for people as well.
Yeah, because I think that's the weird thing. Not just weird, but like for some reason, with the arts, and I've been thinking about this a lot recently because I'm organising a festival coming up, and you know, I've thought I have some ideas to organise some events and everything, but for some weird reason, if I was organising like calçotada or something like that, there would be no niggle in the back of your mind about making money on it, because that's the whole point of doing an endeavour like that. You know, you're ultimately, yeah, you'd be providing something nice, but you need to make money because that's what you use for life. But it's like, for some reason with the arts, people seem to like feel guilty about charging. Because there's a whole thing about art should be free. And I understand that there should be free art available, but also people are pouring loads of time and their own money into making art and then not charging people to receive that art. And it's like, I don't know whether it comes down to not like I suppose it's almost like a fear of failure and a fear of rejection, because it's like, well, if I charge 10 euros for my ticket to come here and no one comes, I'm a total failure. Whereas if it's free, I know people will come. And it's like, it's this weird thing with art. It's like artists are scared to charge things. And I want to see it commercialized a bit. Obviously, you don't want money to be the sole reason you do anything, because that leads to unhappiness and it leads to poor quality in general with anything. You know, you want the essence of it to be, I'm going to make this as best as I possibly can for myself and the people involved. You have to make money. And I felt like the Comedy Clubhouse is like one of the first places that's kind of commercializing it a bit, but it's still totally reasonable. You know, like cheap drinks, reasonable tickets, but you want people to make money because they need it. People need money to be able to be comfortable enough to be able to write and do their stuff. Because if they don't have any money, then they're just stressed about not having any money, which artists, if they don't have another job, which I suppose most have to have another job unless you're earning a decent amount, but it's like, it's really crazy. And that's something I would really like to see, is people rewarded for their work. And that's one of the things that if I'm organising events, I would like to be able to give people a nice, just like a little bit. Like when I perform here, sometimes like some of the events that I get asked to perform at, I might get like 10 euros for it. But that 10 euros is sweet. That 10 euros is the sweetest 10 euros I've ever earned, because it's like, it's just you doing that. Someone's asked you to come and they're paying you 10 euros to do that, and you get a free entry, so you get a little bit of a night out, and you get 10 euros, and that's so sweet. But if that could be 100 or 200 or 300, not for me necessarily now, but like at some point, and other people can be like, okay, this could be a career or at least a side hustle as opposed to just a hobby. It's like, I don't know. It's a sweet idea.
I think you're spot on. It's like the money brings the freedom to be able to do it more and get better at it, right? And, you know, there's plenty of free events and events where you wouldn't expect to get paid in comedy. Most of those will be open mics, because the kind of contract there is, listen, this is a space for you to come and try whatever you want, and we know it won't necessarily be good or polished. It might be awful, but you need, particularly in comedy, you can't, it's one of the only art forms, if not the only art form, that you cannot practice at home on your own. You can recite it to yourself in the mirror, you can write and rewrite, but you don't know until there's an audience in front of you, a real audience, not just a couple of friends or your family, whether that is like, I had someone describe it as, you know, the audience is your instrument, if you want to put it in musical terms. You're trying to play the audience for the moments of laughter, but also the moments of silence or concern or whatever it is. But back to your point on money. So, there is space for free, but you're right. It is hard as an artist to put a value on it, because it seems a weird thing to value. I'm just standing up and talking for 5, 10, 20, maybe up to an hour of time. What is the value on that? And hopefully the value you're bringing is, enjoyment, laughter, disconnection from, the outside world for a little bit of time. And, particularly you talked about running events. I think, as we've said, I run some of my own events. My first priority is like, okay, I want to try not to lose money on the event.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure everyone who does the event is paid what they need to be paid. And I'm willing to take a financial hit to make sure they're still paid. Just ideally not loads.
Yeah.
Getting to the point now is, building the audiences a bit more. These events are starting to make like a small profit, but it's not loads and loads. I don't want to get too much nitty gritty, but there's definitely something in Barcelona about kind of the price of tickets seems like €10 seems to be the top level.
Yeah.
And the sort of where resistance meet resistance is like anything up to 12 and above for these like amateur shows. If a big name rolls into town, they'll charge 40, 50 euros. Like Louis CK's ticket was 45 euros to go and see him in the theatre, obviously.
Yeah, I think, what's his face? What's the Aussie guy?
Jim Jeffries.
Jim Jeffries, yeah. I think his was 35 something, which I thought was quite reasonable, to be honest. Like, because you're in a bigger venue, ultimately.
Yeah. I think with all of it, you're not just asking people to invest money, you're asking them to invest time and concentration, and sit down for an hour without their phones and listening to you. And you got to look at it as like, you're there to give them something, not necessarily to take their time and money away from them. I find that's my philosophy. So, if I'm going to do a show that's somewhat work in progress, say I want to do like an hour. I want to try and do an hour for the first time. So the most I've done so far is like 30 minutes. The first however many times I do that, I'm not going to charge money. I might ask for donations at the end. That's the thing. Pay what you want is a thing in comedy. So you get some money that you can then put into your advertising or whatever. But mostly it's just like, the first thing in my head is, do I feel that after 3 years of comedy, am I ready to give an hour's worth of entertainment to people, or am I just getting them in the room because I feel like I want to try talking for an hour and see how it is? So it's a very, and other different people have different philosophies on this. Some people might be like, well, I'm just going to try it and see how it goes. How will I know otherwise? And other people, I've probably fallen inside of. It's like, okay, have I got a good 15 minutes? Yes. Have I got a good 20 minutes? Okay, yeah, probably. Is my half an hour great? Not yet. So half an hour is the most I'm willing to make someone listen to me do comedy. I have enough material to do an hour, but it's not an hour's worth of great material you would pay 20 euros for, So, yeah, I think with any art, but particularly with comedy, because of the concentration that you're expecting from people.
Yeah.
I think you need to put the audience first and not yourself.
That's something that I really find that when I come to comedy, it requires a huge amount of concentration, because if you don't like the people, you still have to engage, and you don't want to I don't want to sat there with the face like a slapped ass, because it's just not that fair, really. Yeah. And so then I have to force a smile on my face. You don't have to force a laugh, you have to just force a smile, which to me requires a lot of effort because I've got resting bastard face. So like it requires a lot of effort, and then sometimes there'll be a second show on afterwards, and people are like, "Oh, are you staying for the second show?" I'm like, I can't do it. I can't concentrate for another hour because it's a big energy exchange, and obviously if you're seeing people who are really good and really polished, then it flows. But if you're seeing people who are not so polished, then it is a drag sometimes.
Yeah, and then the audience picks up on that. They're smart. They can tell if you're there for yourself or if you're there for them, I think. And you have to be there for them because, like I said, but it's a two-way exchange. If there wasn't audience there, you could still stand up and talk, but it wouldn't be fun for you. And they're there to, because they want you to do well. They want to laugh. They didn't come, well, with the possible exception of one or two people sometimes it shows who are just there to misbehave. Most of them are there because they want to laugh. They want to have a good time. they will do their best to laugh when you're funny. And when you're not, they still want you to be funny. They won't just be like, boo, get off, you're rubbish. The worst thing you can do, and this is something I've only in the last year really got my head around because I'm still relatively new to it, is, people talk about this phrase bombing, right? So if you're up on stage and you're telling jokes and it's getting no laughs and it's getting really uncomfortable, the worst thing you can do, actually, no, I'll spin it. The best thing you can do is to acknowledge that and vocalize the fact that the joke didn't land or things aren't going well, because that breaks the tension in the audience and they will laugh at, even though you're not saying funny, they will laugh at that because you've recognized something in the room and an energy. The worst thing you can do is just keep going and keep going and keep going, continue to bomb and never acknowledge it, because then they feel uncomfortable for you. You know what it's like when you watch like a comedian that's just doing really, really badly and they've never once said they are. You think, oh my God, do they think they're good? Or do they, like, you can tell in their face they know they're bad, but I feel really bad for them and now I don't feel like laughing. It's really horrible. And that's fine. It can happen, but you have to acknowledge it, I think. And then that's, you always, you provide something that at least you provide an acknowledgement of like, hey, like, we understand the energy of this room together,
Yeah, it's like a while back, I think it was, what's his name, Sid Singh or something like that. And he was like giving tips on people on the Sharp Go Up, and one of the first things he said was always address the elephant in the room. So like there was a guy that was there that was like fucking like 6'8" or something. He's like, go on and say, yeah, I'm really fucking tall, because then the audience is like, oh, you are, like, and then they get someone on your side, and it's like, you go on and be like, as you'll see, I'm a fat fuck or something like that, and then people are like, oh yeah, he is, we noticed that as well, and it's like gets them on your side and like builds this little weird relationship. And I think that to me, that's like the most important, the most interesting thing about comedy is like the human to human thing, because I was listening to a lot of jokes, that a lot of people don't really have a punchline in their joke. They'll tell a story and they can be quite theatrical with their movement. There's quite a few people here who are very theatrical. And what they're saying is like, if you had it written down and you read it, it'd be like, that's not very funny. But then they're theatrical with it and people are like laughing and facial expressions and all this different stuff. And people just like latch onto it. And it's nice. To me, I like the classic punchline and the, when they'll tell a few jokes and then right at the end of the set, it'll tie in and I don't know what it's called, but when they tie it up.
Like a callback.
Like, I'm like, to me, that's like really satisfying. I'm like, oh yeah, like, because it's like building that sense of community. It's like, oh yeah, we were there at the beginning and now you're doing it at the end and now we're all together in this. And it's like, but I also, for my own personal, what I like to do is, like, I'm pretty monotone in my talk. And I like to just say things really deadpan, and then most people just don't know if I'm joking or not. So I was like, I got a poem about, it's called Genocidal Spider, and it was based on Birds Aren't Real. Like, have you heard of the Birds Aren't Real movement?
Is that the one where people think they're like cameras flying around spying on us?
Yeah. And so I was like, so I recently found out the birds aren't real. And then obviously like some people laugh, but there was a woman at the front and one of the times and she looked so concerned. And I was like, yeah, so actually the government recalled 15 billion birds and replaced them for flying drones. She was like, oh my God, she was like looking to herself like, what the fuck? How did I not know this? And I was just like thinking, I was laughing so much to myself thinking, I hope this woman goes away and is genuinely concerned. Then she's like researching like birds aren't real and she'll see this massive movement with like hundreds of thousands of people that have just joined along in this thing. And I'm like, this is just so great.
Yeah, I'm interested to know, so because you do spoken word. Have you tried a comedy set? I think I saw you do one.
I've done a couple.
Yeah. How do you find the difference in terms of how you feel up there and the way you're trying to connect with people, or is it the same to you? I'm interested to know about that.
I find it's way easier to connect with comedy. I thought I've done 2 or 3 comedy sets, which is straight comedy. Usually I've done a few poetry comedy sets, and then in the middle of each poem, I'll like link it with some just comedy talking, so, and I really like that. That feels the most natural to me. But when I went on and I did some straight comedy set, I felt way less nervous than when I do poetry, which I did not expect.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I always figured, there's one key difference is obviously is that you could write a funny poem, I guess, where you might expect laughter. But when you're doing sort of straight spoken word, it's like, how do you know what you're saying is going well? Because you don't have that laughter cue. You get an applause at the end, and maybe you can gauge if you feel like it was a polite applause or genuine, like rapturous, like grateful applause. But in comedy, yeah, every few seconds you get the encouragement or discouragement of laughing or not laughing. So it's interesting that you felt less nervous.
Less nervous with the comedy.
With comedy, yeah.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
the pressure is to get people to laugh. That's your feedback.
Yeah, but I think that that's why I expected it to be way worse. However, when I did it, it felt more like I was just talking to my mates, and it felt like that is the role that I used to play with my mates back at home. Like talking shit, telling stupid stories, and talking shit, which is what it is. So it just felt normal. And I would say that usually I'm disappointed with my delivery in poetry. I think that my writing is fairly good. I'm satisfied with the level I'm at for the amount of time that I've been doing it. My performance is bad, and I'm working on that. Whereas I thought that with the comedy, my performance, I was really happy with the way it went. My material, I knew my material was like a 5 or 6 out of 10. Got some laughs at some points. I knew it was going to be like that because I hadn't put a huge amount of effort or thought into it. I just wanted to try just to see what it'd be like. So it was like, yeah, it was just average like that. But then spoken word, when I'm doing I've got a few which are more personal, and those are horrible to perform most of the time. Even though, because that's pure vulnerability, and that's, I think, often the difference with spoken word is that you're opening up your emotions and you're saying this is raw me written kind of from the heart. And if someone were to reject it, that would hurt a lot. That's the initial feeling. And you're right, you have absolutely no idea if people like it or not. So it's just pure silence. But I noticed before that when I went to here, people are very receptive to everything. People laugh a lot. People come up and talk to you a lot afterwards. Back in England, I did some of my funny poems. And when I first performed them, it was silence in the crowd. And I was like, oh my God, I'm bombing. And I was still quite new to it. And I was like, this is fucking terrible. And I couldn't wait for it to finish. It was 10 minutes, I did about 3 or 4. Then at the end of a few people came up and they were like, oh my God, that was so funny. And I was like, why didn't you laugh? Tell me that. And I was like, all of them. And then I was like, wait a minute, I'm in England. People are generally, and it was performing in a pub. I was like, people are generally more kind of serious.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, okay, this is probably a cultural thing. To make people laugh here is probably going to be a lot more difficult than it will be in Barcelona, where people are just merry. And you've always got 1 or 2 people in the crowd who will just crack up. And then once you've got those 1 or 2 people, then everyone's cracking up. And it's you just need a couple of those catalysts in there that break it. But yeah, the spoken word is it's horrible sometimes, to be honest.
It's interesting what you say about the audience. I feel that here too, and it might be false. I don't gig a lot in London. I have done a few times, and it just mostly at open mics, done all right. But it was kind of quite early on, and I did some stuff at Edinburgh last year, which went okay as well. But I do feel here everyone is way more friendly in the audience, and I think part of that is to do with the majority of the audience are not native English speakers. So I feel like they're somehow more forgiving. You'll get bigger laughs than maybe you expect sometimes. There's also the danger that you'll use a joke that maybe they don't get the reference, or the wordplay was too intricate and their English wasn't as strong. So I love wordplay jokes, and sometimes I'll do one on stage, and I might get a couple of laughs or a groan, and they're really just for my amusement. But it's given me this slight fear of performing in front of British crowds who I know are more demanding. They're more willing to jump in and heckle and try and be the funny one. Like I said, I did this gig in Ibiza the other day. 90% British people, 30 plus. And in fairness, like I was just emceeing, but which again was also hard because like I need to connect with these people. And it went fine. I actually really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. But I do think we have very forgiving audiences here. But it's such a great place to just like learn your craft in a nice environment, and understand how to write, how to perform. And I think when some of us, like there's a girl here called Irene Meneguzzi, Argentinian comedian, who performs in Spanish and in English on our scene. And I saw her go over to London and perform at one of the top clubs there, and she absolutely smashed it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she did. Do you know Irene?
I know who she is, but I don't really know her personally.
She's a fantastic comedian, great writer, but they absolutely loved her. So it just kind of shows that like I don't want to put the audiences down here at all. They're brilliant, and they're getting more and more varied and different. They tend to be a little younger because of the whole like expat Erasmus vibe. But there is definitely a difference when you go back to the UK, or even I've performed in the States as well, like completely different in other ways. So,
because I feel like British people are quite awkward, and then they're awkward, but then if they've had a few drinks, then they're a little bit rowdy. Yeah. So I'm like, it's quite different between that, because I've done a fair few just open mics in London. Just when I'm back, like I try and squeeze in as many as I can because there's zillions in London. And yeah, some of them you go to and people are like dead quiet. There's a few of them which are more like tight-knit communities that people are much more receptive. But here it's just people are so friendly. So it's like, it's way less uncomfortable, I think, being on the stage and talking to people, just because it's just easy to talk to European people, really. Most people are just really friendly. And that was going to bring me on to my question about, with the roast battle, are there cultural differences, and if so, like how do those cultures clash? Because one culture, one level of mean might be acceptable, whereas another culture might not.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting question. I don't know if I have a read on it yet, to be honest with you. I think the individuals that come to our show, no matter where they're from, hopefully know what they're getting into. But I don't know if that, I know, for instance, a French person who comes to watch our roast battle in English are there because the French love that humor, or because they're just a French person that likes that humor. Do you know what I mean? We do our best in the promotion to really explain, listen, this is no holds barred. You're going to hear some pretty screwed up stuff occasionally, but it's a safe space to do that. And people may have their opinions on this who are listening, but we do allow jokes that play on like racial stereotypes, sexual stereotypes. Like it's all allowed, because they trust that the comedians are doing it coming from a space of love and accepting of each other. When the comedians meet up before, like, you often say, listen, like, do you have any red lines? Is there anything I can't talk about? I know, a parent dying or, a particular thing, and you respect that. But to your original question, I think there is a difference in culture. When I see the American battles, they can be much more brutal. They're much more direct, shall I say. There's less wordplay. A lot of it is just like, I'm going to say something really aggressive and use like a lot of swear words. And they are very funny. But they're a lot more brutal there because I think they're used to that culture, and I think it's kind of an American thing. Whereas you look at the London ones, also brutal, but I think British humor is much more about sarcasm, irony, wordplay, sometimes just being silly and surreal. So I love watching those battles, but they are different to the States. And I think here we're somewhere in between. Our comedians are obviously from all over the world as well. So yeah, it's hard to say. I think what we've tried to do is impress on people that when you're up there doing it, you're not making a best man speech. You're not, or bridesmaid speech. You're not there saying, oh, Connor once like pooped himself at school. Like, isn't that funny? Not saying you did, Connor, by the way.
I did when I was like 6.
I mean, we all did it once, right?
I remember it so vividly.
Yeah.
I thought it was a fart. It wasn't.
Yeah, it's not that. It's like, it's a joke writing competition, right? So there has to be a setup and a punchline. So it could be about you pooping yourself, but it's not like, hey, he pooped himself. That's funny, right? It's like, Connor once pooped himself at school. deliver a punchline based on that setup. But when we see, now we're sending the clips into this roast battle league, it's really interesting because the people that watch it and critique it, they are American. And they do seem to get a bit lost when we start doing the more subtle wordplay jokes, and we don't do it such in the American style. They almost like downgrade us for that because the humor is just really, really different. Is that kind of what you were getting at?
That is exactly what I was getting at. Well, yeah, partly that, but partly like, do you think that, I mean, you said there that the Americans are very brutal. Are there countries which have seemed to be like a bit more vanilla?
I don't know about vanilla. I mean, I've watched some of the battles from Canada because Toronto is in the league. And again, they're a bit like the American, well, just like Canada. They're like the Americans, but just like, I think, toned down a little bit more, like a bit friendlier, which makes sense because they're Canadians. The guys in Tokyo, they're all mostly expats.
Okay.
Look, there's definitely, there is a roasting style, and within that, there's some kind of sub-styles, I think. But I think in terms of the audience here, the best jokes that land are the ones that are about the most obvious, like you said before, addressing the elephant in the room, what someone looks like, how they're dressed, how they sound, something about where they're from, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes I'm a bit guilty of overwriting my roast jokes because I really like playing around and being creative with it, and I deliver it and it doesn't get the real punch that I wanted it to. I still love it as a joke. But perhaps it either went over someone's head, or it was too wordy and needed word economy to make it a bit more interesting. But that's one of the hardest things about that show is, any other comedy show, you go and you write jokes and you practice them at open mics and you see what works and how you can change it around. But this is like a one-shot gig. You've written these jokes, you have one time, you get 5 jokes each. And you're in a competition with someone. Like, there's a lot of pressure to write good material. So it's actually a really, really good exercise for people to just get their joke writing on point.
Yeah. It's like, I'm also guilty a little bit of what you say there of sometimes overwriting things. And sometimes I'll write something and I'll think it's like the sickest line in the whole poem. And then it just doesn't land. Like, nobody really gets it. And to me, I'm like, oh, that's so good. Like, why'd they miss that? And then there'll be another part of it, which I don't think is that funny, that for whatever reason lands so well. And you're like, oh, like, you didn't think that through. You didn't think it would be like that. But
yeah,
it's the audience tells you, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, like, one of the golden rules of comedy, I think, is write what you think is funny. And then eventually you'll find your audience. But in something like this, it's slightly different because, like, that you're not going to do that material again. So you have to really think, like, what's going to work. And I'll give you an example. So I was roasting a guy here called Alec, and he had told me that his wife had left him a few years ago for his best friend and all this. And he also, I know him well, and he hates it when people call him Alex because his name is Alec. So I'm going to try and brutalize this, but I had written a joke that was something around, I had been calling him Alec the entire time. And then by like joke 4, I was like, actually, guys, I'm sorry, his name is Alex. But I've been calling him Alex with an X because he kept crying about how he wanted his X back. Okay. Now, like, that, it sort of works as a joke, but it didn't land at all. Whereas earlier, all I had said was he looks like every character from the game Guess Who, and that got like a huge laugh because you just look at him, you go, oh yeah, I get that. Do you know what I mean? There wasn't so much to think about in the setup. Now, if I had a chance to go and rewrite that Alec joke, maybe I could make it a bit shorter, snappier, find another way of attacking it. But I don't have that opportunity. So that's just like an example of where I sometimes I remember writing it down first time and laughing to myself, going, oh, that's so smart. I love it. It's brilliant. I can't wait to do that one. And I'm going to set it up throughout the entire thing. And then it just people didn't like it as much as I thought they would.
Yeah, I suppose they don't know that he's told you that specifically as like one of the little things before that they tell you that his wife's left him or something. So
no, so they knew that because I'd made a joke about his wife leaving earlier on. So they had all the information. It just... it just wasn't as funny as I thought it was, you know, because I think I tried to be a bit too clever. If I just made another joke about him being bald or wearing glasses, people would have loved it because you could see that right in front of you. You don't need to think about it, you know. So
yeah, there is something very funny about bald people. But that I want to ask you about what role do you think that comedy plays in the setting of boundaries for what is socially acceptable in speech in general? So that's a long-winded way of saying, what's your opinion on the cancel culture debate?
Yeah, I figured that where you might be getting at. You know, it's funny. I'm sometimes conflicted with this, and my attitude can change by the day. So I guess where to start from with my perspective is I'm someone who generally tries to be respectful. I think I'm a naturally compassionate person. I hate seeing anyone victimized for no reason or any reason, really. That's sort of a way I try to live my life, and I don't have time for it. But then I'm a comedian, and I do feel that that is a space where we should be allowed to explore ideas and ways of finding humor in pretty much anything. Mm-hmm. I think you can find humor in anything. Where we run into trouble is, as I said before, you can't practice at home. So, you know, you could be doing material for weeks, months, you know, even years sometimes with a joke that's, let's say, could be seen as controversial, trying to find like the right way to say it. But the first few times you say it, it's just an idea in your head. It might come across as racist or sexist without the funny bit, but we can't know until we try it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think overall it's kind of ridiculous that people hold comedians sometimes to higher standards than they hold actual like politicians and things. You know, comedians are just saying words, and I know words have meaning and they have power, but ultimately it's an art form. On the other side of the fence, I do not really like comedy where it feels more like an angry manifesto than trying to find humor in something maybe dark or controversial. I do think you can punch down. I don't, you know, some people say you must only punch up. I think you can punch down. But again, you better be bloody good at it. And the audience needs to maybe know that there is a persona on stage and not a person. So, you know, Frankie Boyle, for instance, to use an example, is a Scottish comedian who does really, really dark, horrible material that can be very nasty to people. But that's his shtick. Outside of that, he's a very liberal, sensitive, you know, he's a great writer. He's got a loving family. It's just his thing. And I think the danger when people come into comedy for the first time is they see comedy like that and they're like, oh yeah, I can just say like the darkest, meanest shit possible and people will laugh. And you know, I've met some people on the scene here and they say, oh, it's not fair, you know, cancel culture, it's too many woke comedians. And it's nonsense. The issue is you don't know how to do it yet. So don't kill yourself and kill your comedy career before time by trying to do the darkest, hardest. It's the hardest thing.
Yeah.
To be dark and funny and still keep the audience on your side. It would be like saying, I want to learn how to juggle, and I'm going to start by juggling chainsaws that are on, you know, like, no, you chop your arms off. It's the same thing with jokes. I'm not going to start comedy and go up and start talking about things that could be construed as racist or whatever, because I don't have the talent and the tools to do it. Sorry if I'm rambling on a bit, but again, it's in an art form where it seems easy, right? Oh, it's just someone standing on stage talking. Yeah, ostensibly that's right, in the same way that playing the trumpet is just blowing into a tube, but you're not making music, you know? So it's, I've got sort of a roundabout way of saying that I don't like cancel culture, but I think comedians have a responsibility to understand that the audience does have limits and they have their own limits of how far they can push it based on their talent and their experience, basically.
Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. And I'd not thought of the point about talent being involved, because that is that really is something. Because like if you're an amateur and you're going up for the first time and you go and you just say a load of racist, sexist stuff, then everyone's like, who is this person? Why are they saying racist, sexist stuff? Whereas like you like the likes of Frankie Boyle, Jimmy Carr can say basically whatever they want.
Yeah, Jimmy Carr's a great example.
Because they've done it for ages. And like because I'm split on this as well, and there is no right answer, I don't think.
No.
I'm of the opinion that things should not be censored in general because it doesn't solve any issue. You know, like I'm of the opinion that, like you say, comedians have responsibility. Any person on a stage anywhere, any person in any position of power has a huge responsibility. You know, like releasing this podcast out, I have a responsibility to do my best, not to spout shit, not to be an arsehole, not to try and warp anyone's mind with things that are like just unpleasant and unnecessary.
You're doing a great job.
But I feel compelled to get people talking about these issues and discover the answers themselves. I don't have the answers, I never will, but I think that I've heard a theory before that comedians and creatives are on the fringes of society. They are the ones, so the likes of comedians, film directors, TV producers, they're on the fringes of society, setting the limits of what's acceptable. And every so often, they'll go too far, and society will say, no, that's fucked up, like, that's too far. And then the limit gets pushed back a little bit. But I'm of the opinion that you need these, like, you need extreme people there, because then you see those extreme people and you say, I don't want to be like that person. Or, you know, like, we naturally within us, I think, well, biologically, for example, we naturally have a suspicion of foreign things and people, you know, like, to keep us safe, people who do not fit into our tribe, we're suspicious of. So that could be, you know, it could be gay people, it could be people of different origins, it could be, you know, trans people now, like, they don't fit into what you know. You have a natural suspicion towards it because you don't understand it. Mm-hmm. And I think that comedians commenting about these things in the space of a comedy show where everyone is in there, they're talking about things that people are thinking, you know. And I think that, like, when people might have these thoughts and not really understand why they're having these feelings and thoughts against people, and why maybe they've been taught to be racist, or, you know, grown up racist, which a lot of people have because of, you know, like, immigrants coming in and not that new, not that old, sorry. Like, so our parents' generation, our parents above, like, they're not that used to all these changes. And then you've had radical changes of immigration. You've had radical changes of, you know, more openly gay people. And now you've got more, like, more openly trans people and all this. And it's like, it's a lot for people to take on board. And I think that comedy and creator spaces are, they say the things that a lot of people are confused about. And then someone making a joke about it can make people think, oh, okay, maybe it's not so wrong that I'm having these strange thoughts, these other people are. And it, like, releases the tension a bit, and it kind of like, whew, everyone's like, oh, okay. And obviously the more famous a comedian gets, people will go towards their style or not. And then, you know, some people, they might like comedy that's not offending anyone and is very family friendly. And you know, Peter Kay, I think, is great because he does totally family friendly stuff, and it's just like typical stuff talking about watching TV with your family or something like that. And it's like, yeah, you know, and that does exist. And I just think that it's, we are at, like, for example, something like extreme right, extreme left, neo-Nazis, all these people, you can't just cancel those people because they don't cease to exist, you know. And then those people, if they don't have a space to express their views, those views will then manifest in other ways inside them. And if they feel repressed, then that can turn into actions that maybe wouldn't have happened. And then, you know, subcultures of all this thing developing. Whereas if you have, you know, neo-Nazi group, you can go and meet up in this little square and talk about your neo-Nazi stuff or whatever.
You make it sound so nice.
Yeah, and it's just like, but you stay over there. You can also post stuff on Facebook, and then the rest of the world will look at you and think, yeah, not into that, thanks. But we know that exists, so let's be wary of that. But it brings up the whole conversation of, okay, why are these neo-Nazi people thinking this? why do we have people who are like really homophobic or really racist? Like, why are these people? Because people inherently are not bad. People have learned these behaviors, and a lot of it just does come from suspicion and fear of the unknown. And it's like, by breaking it down and normalizing it, I think that that is part of the role of comedy. And by trying to cancel anything or censor anything, you're not solving anything.
Yeah, I think with the problem with canceling cancel culture around comedy is that a lot of it comes from people who weren't in the room when the thing was said. It wasn't for them. They weren't the target audience. There was the Jimmy Carr joke he did recently about travelers and the Holocaust. Not a great joke. I didn't love it either, but that's his thing. But that was said in front to a live audience of people who had bought tickets to see a Jimmy Carr show and know that Jimmy Carr is going to say some pretty screwed up stuff, right? As soon as it's taken out of that context and put into a Daily Mail article, and of course someone reads that who doesn't find that thing in the slightest bit funny. Oh my God, that's terrible. We should cancel. And it's like, yeah, but it wasn't for you to listen to.
Then it's the responsibility of the person that publishes it.
Exactly.
Then they're the one that's spreading it around. They're effectively the one saying it. It's like, that's the total ridiculousness of it. It's like, no one would know about it if you didn't publish it in the bloody national newspaper.
And why have they published it? Because it generates debate, it generates division, it generates conversation, and therefore generates money. So who's really being cynical there? Is it the comedian exploring, the boundaries of what we find funny in our society and in ourselves, or is it the kind of disingenuous hand wringing of a media that's just trying to stoke up, clicks basically? So, I've watched comedians. I will laugh at the darkest stuff, but sometimes someone says something, I'm like, I don't think that's coming from a place that I feel comfortable with. I'm not going to turn around and say, oh, they're cancelled. I might, if I was watching a show and the comedy wasn't what I liked, I might leave. But I'm not going to say that person should never do comedy again. I'm just not going to watch that person.
Yeah.
I think, we went slightly off comedy and more into just more, people's political leanings. And I do think there is a distinction there, because some of those people are genuinely trying to change the world in a way that will victimize people in, whether it's far right, any kind of extreme. Someone's going to lose out. I don't think that's quite the same as someone telling jokes about it. There might be some comedians who feel like they're there not to just make people laugh, but to be truth tellers and be part of a movement. There's a gray area there, I think. But I think we need to be wary of conflating those two things necessarily, of like the group of like neo-Nazis meeting up in a town square, and maybe you weren't doing this, but them, and then like a comedian making like a joke about a disabled person because they thought it was funny. I think those are two different things going on there, personally.
No, those are two very distinct things, and I don't want to insinuate that comedians and neo-Nazis are the same thing. But it was more just the point of censorship in general. But because you either, like, the problem with censorship is that where do you draw the line? You either have to start censoring, you have to say, I mean, you can't quantify it. In general, censorship doesn't work. Like I said, it breeds resentment, whether that's resentment within political movement or it's resentment from the people, because the distinction, the comparison I was making was, extreme political views like neo-Nazis and what would be considered extreme views about gay people, like the individuals there. But then the comedian is the one that makes the link between the two. I'm going to joke about gay people. I'm also going to joke about Nazis and Jews. Well, I suppose more specifically about Jews or the Holocaust. And then the comedian is the kind of link between those two, commenting about the thing that those people have got their knickers in a twist about in the first place. Yeah. And then it's like they're hopefully easing some tension a little bit. Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I'm afraid that I was going to segue that back onto my own comedy again. But so I
I have like a show with a friend of mine. We're both from Jewish backgrounds, but neither of us ever been religiously Jewish. I grew up around a lot of like the kind of culture of being Jewish, like the food and the family and that kind of stuff, but never believed in God and never observed any of. I didn't even have a bar mitzvah or anything like that. And our show is called Fake Jews. It's like a pun on fake news.
Oh, I saw that. I thought that was very funny.
Right, but we called it that because I found myself writing a lot about myself as a Jewish person who's not really Jewish, because ostensibly when I go on stage I am a straight white male, so it's kind of a way of differentiating. Not that like Jews are like, well, I guess we are a minority, but it's not like you've never seen one before. But it was just a way I found when I was writing to find interesting things to touch on. But I'd written some jokes that I really liked and that were working. But what I started to slowly figure out was they were playing on stereotypes in a way that was creating almost like a safe space for certain members of the audience to kind of enjoy those stereotypes in the way I didn't really mean them to be enjoyed, if that makes sense. Like laughing at the fact that Jews love money as a stereotype, for instance, which is just purely just ridiculous. But people were like, yeah. And I was getting like weird heckles about it. And I remember stepping off stage one time and being like, oh, that just felt off. Like, I don't want to do this material if that's what the energy I'm creating. So I went away and thought about it, and I started to rewrite some of the jokes so they're less just using a stereotype to get a ha ha ha, and more exploring that stereotype, exposing the fact that we laughed at a joke that was about Jews loving money, and then laughing at the fact that we laughed at that, and then exposing how ridiculous that is.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
I had this joke where I was like, oh, I dated a girl who ended up being a sex worker basically, and she was charging 200 euros an hour. So, because I'm Jewish, I started to figure out like what was the value of the sex I got for free. It's kind of a clumsy joke, but like it would always get a laugh. But then I kind of developed that into saying like, okay, that's a joke about Jews loving money. We're all laughing at that, because they do. Unlike all the other religions, of course, who hate money, and I just start like listing examples from like, Catholic Church wealth and, some, Dubai and being, an Islamic state and all that kind of stuff. So it's like, again, there are actually jokes in that, people listening, like come and see the show and you'll see. I'm brutalizing my own material a little bit, but it's like, yeah, it's having that sensibility as the artist and be like, what is the energy that I want to create from this material? Do I just want to like laugh at, do I just want to punch down at people because it's easy? Or do I want to find a way where we can laugh at ourselves for those prejudices that we, for some reason, have because of, media, society, our own upbringing, etc. For me, that's far more interesting. That being said, love a good dick joke.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have to be cerebral all the time. But it's just
farts.
kind of, yeah.
Farts, can't go wrong with farts.
Farts, dicks, vaginas, period. It's all there. It's all funny. But that's sort of where I would like to get to as I develop the talent for joke writing, is writing sort of short, snappy jokes that everyone can relate to, but finding a way to bring it around to sort of what it means to me, and ultimately, sounds really pretentious, like make people think a little bit. I want them to laugh. I want them to go away thinking that was hilarious, but also just to slightly change the perception that you have of either a group or of yourself and what you kind of find funny. That's an area I would like to be in ultimately as I kind of move down the line in this.
Because the strange thing is that with something like this, I mean, what do you think is the responsibility of a part of a marginalized group? For example, a Jew, a black person, like the classic marginalized groups. So what do you think is the responsibility, for example, in the case of a Jew who is doing comedy, to not exacerbate that stereotype by making like money jokes and all the classics? Because a lot of those type of jokes, I only know those stereotypes because Jews talk about those stereotypes in an ironic way. It's like, it's the same argument, well, similar argument to the should black people use the N-word if they want the N-word to disappear? And it's like, it's kind of the same thing. Like, what responsibility, I suppose you can't speak on behalf of the black people, but what responsibility would you think of as a Jewish person to try and keep the comedy? I suppose you've already answered it a little bit by saying, you're trying to go one step above and mock the ridiculousness of it in the first place, but to even the potential of ironing out that material and just being like, I don't even need to say I'm a Jew in the first place because why bother?
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion because I feel a bit disappointed when I see someone from any minority or group get on stage and just do all the usual stuff about what you've heard a million times about them. I want to know so that's why like I've got some material that deals in those stereotypes, but it always comes back to how I feel about it. What is it about me that I'm showing in that performance? And you're right. It is, a lot of Jewish comedians do go up and they kind of almost underline those stereotypes by talking about them. And, I've seen, black comics get up and, they talk about like black people having big dicks and, it's just like, all right, man, like, you're talking about what you want to talk about. Like, it's fine. It's your art. It's your space. But it's like, tell me something new. Tell me something new about the black experience or your personal experience as a black person, just, or as a gay person, as a trans person, whatever, as a Jewish person. I can't remember what your like actual question was. It was just like, what do you feel like a responsibility to it, or?
Yeah, I mean, like, do you think that there should be a responsibility from people to I suppose it's still self-censoring, or do you think it would be like to do what you're doing, which is going one step above and trying to mock the ridiculousness of these stereotypes and say basically these stereotypes are stupid? So to try and change people's perspective, or do you think it would be more useful to basically iron out the jokes and just not make those jokes and in the hope that they would just disappear?
Yeah, no, I don't think we should iron them out because I think what people like when someone's on stage is they like to hear from people who are different. We don't, do you want to see a guy who looks like you, sounds like you, has your life experience, just talk about things that only you relate to? Like, I don't know. I don't like you want to be able to relate to what they're saying in some way, but I want to know what makes you you. And if what makes you you, often it is your race, religion, sexuality, gender identification, whatever it is. I think ironing that out, as you say, would make it a bit more boring. But again, it just comes down to, and I'm not the arbiter in this. I only have my opinion. Ultimately, the audience is the arbiter in this. If the audience is enjoying it and laughing, then good for you. Again, it's not about you. It's about giving them a good night. And everyone has different tastes, right? So, someone might be absolutely killing with jokes that I hate, but the audience is loving it, and I resent them, I resent the audience for it, but that's just my opinion, It's like I'm not going to stop that person doing it or tell them to stop if that's what's working for them.
Yeah. One thing I found that I just noticed, just because there is a lot of Jewish people in this scene specifically, like, and I wonder why that is. I wonder why that is. Because, for example, in my life up until recently, not met that many Jews overall. And percentage-wise, there's not that many Jews compared to non-Jews. But then here, there's quite a lot. And the scene's quite small, and there's quite a lot percentage-wise. I wonder why that is.
It could be a number of reasons. I mean, certainly, stand-up comedy is a very big part of kind of self-deprecation, even without, cause the thing of being a comedy is a huge part of the Jewish experience. Jewish people are very funny, generally creative people. That's why I always laugh when people are like, oh, the Jews, they control the movie industry. It's like, yeah, because actually, at the time when Hollywood started to boom, Jewish people weren't allowed to have other jobs. They had to create, and they could work in banking. why all the Jews control the banks, because they had to. And they basically created an industry, which is the movie and entertainment industry, because what else were they going to do? So, I do think, you find a lot of Jewish people in and around comedy, whether it's performing or producing. Here in particular, I've got no idea. I mean, there's not a huge Jewish community in Barcelona in general, but there are a lot of people here from cities like New York and London, where there is quite a high density of Jewish people. I honestly couldn't tell you. Maybe it's just something in our bones that draws us to it. People don't realize. I don't think a lot of people realize. There's. I think I read it's 0.02% of the world's population are Jews, which is
1 in 5,000.
It's like, I think it's something like 14 million people, right, in the world, which is nothing. That's like the whole thing with Kanye West. He has 18 million followers on Instagram, right? Like, that's to sort of put it in perspective of all that kind of thing. So it is interesting then to see like a higher density of Jewish people in stand-up comedy, maybe over-indexing than you might expect from that percentage of people. And I think Jewish people are drawn to something where you get to express your pain and your anxieties in front of a group of people who will listen to you. I think that is something that's sort of in our culture. I say ours, so like, again, like I said, I'm a fake Jew, so I grew up around a lot of the culture, but I never really identified with it properly.
You got the blood in the genes, though, and that's the most important thing, I think.
Yeah, and I think comedy has brought me closer to my roots, because when I'm writing these jokes, I'm starting to research more because I want to be informed, but also just emotionally, it makes me feel more connected to it. I've been really enjoying like talking to my family members recently, just asking them more about like their upbringings, or I was in Prague recently for a show, and I spent 2 out of the 3 days walking around synagogues. I never would have done that before, because the more I talk about it on stage, the more I do feel this responsibility of like, well, who the hell am I to talk about this stuff when I haven't really followed it? I don't want to disrespect anyone who really does feel strongly Jewish by making like stupid jokes about it or claiming that I'm Jewish. That's the name fake Jews is a funny name with a pun, but it's generally like it kind of sums up kind of how I felt writing it as well a little bit.
Because I knew that when I saw that, I didn't realize that you had Jewish roots. I knew that what's his face?
Luke.
Yeah, I knew that Luke is a Jew. And so, but then I was like, oh, that's strange that it would be like have that name for someone who's a non-Jew to be involved in that. And
I was like, you thought of me.
Yeah, I was just like, that's strange. Do you know what I mean? It's like whatever goes, that's fine. But I was like, oh, that's odd.
Yeah.
I've always been very fascinated with Jews in general, and I started learning Hebrew for a bit. I switched over to Arabic because I feel that's going to be more useful for now. But then I will go back to learning Hebrew at some point. But I don't know virtually anything about Jewish history apart from like biblical Jewish history. Mm-hmm. So I know like the beginning story of the Jews from the Bible, and then nothing after that. But like for now, I've spent the past 6 months or so learning about African struggles and the African experience, basically. And once I'm done with that in a year or two, then I'm going to go on to the Jewish experience and learn about that, because I think that marginalized groups are fascinating. Africa is fascinating because of the kingdoms and everything they had. And to then have that kind of stripped away, then be enslaved, and then, you have a whole load of Africa that's left in total poverty, and then you have people spread around everywhere, and South Africa, which is just, I've just finished Trevor Noah's book called Born a Crime, and like that to me, it's called Born a Crime because he is mixed race, so what they call coloured, with an African mother and a Dutch or Swiss father, so coloured, and that like being born coloured was a crime, because it was a crime for the whites and the blacks to mix. So then you like grow up in this weird limbo where you're not accepted by the whites, you're not accepted by the blacks, and he was also not accepted by the coloreds because he grew up with a black mother because his father left, and then he grew up around all the Africans, so like in his heart and soul he was black, but his skin side otherwise, and you're supposed to only really mix with your own color. And so he just tells his story growing up about that, and I'm like, fuck, I never thought of it like that. Like the actual laws of segregation and apartheid for them, like I just never thought about that. It's insane. So yeah, that's really interesting. I enjoyed that. And then I've got Malcolm X, his autobiography next, and then I'm just like, it's just so crazy to think that this level of discrimination has been relatively recently. Even the Holocaust, like less than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
It's insane. Like I just released a poem today called Everyone's Fucked, and like the reason I got thinking about it was because I started thinking about generational trauma and thinking that the World War was only 2 generations away. So like a lot of people have grandparents who experienced that, and then they had all these fucked up things happening, like millions of people dying, your friends, your family, your brothers, your sisters, like everything like that. Then they have to deal with all of that trauma, have no like resources to deal with it in terms of like, you can just easily go on the internet and watch a YouTube video with someone like, this is some CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy for you. They have to just like carry on and rebuild the country and not really process any of it. Then that gets passed down, then that gets passed down. Then it's no wonder you end up with like global opioid crises and drug crises. And in England, you know, like alcohol and drug problems, like rife problems. It's like, this is so recent, you know, and these type of things must take so long to smooth out and to at least be understood. So I'm just trying to like learn more about these horrible experiences that people have had to live through.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's a shame most of the world don't have your ability to seek knowledge and understanding like that. I think people are getting more and more entrenched in this sort of tribal thing where, you know, my team's right and your team's wrong, and the sort of death of nuance, right, is difficult. And you know, bring it back to the kind of the topic before is, you know, that does start making it quite difficult as a performer, because I think the best comedians do deal in the kind of the gray space in between the different extremes. And you do get people like, oh, that person doesn't believe what I believe, therefore they're a dickhead, you know? And it's just like, it doesn't matter what side you're on. That's a really shitty perspective to have, you know? It really is. But no, it's cool that you're doing that. I mean, I know very little about the religious side of the Jewish story. I mean, I remember like reading, you know, obviously the Bible and the Old Testament, which is a Christian book, but it talks a lot about, you know, the origins, sections of the Torah, that kind of thing. But I also have less interest in it. Like, I'd like to sit down with it, and because I think that's where you start to understand where people's fundamental beliefs come from, is those scriptures. But I'm more interested right now in just like the history of the community in different times, different places. I'm reading a book right now called The Last Jew, which is a fictional book, but based around the time of the Spanish Inquisition, when the Jews were expelled from Spain. Obviously now living in Spain, it's, you know, some interesting additional context to that. You know, that's the kind of thing I'm connecting to, because I you know, another stereotype of Jewish people is that you know, we're hypochondriacs, we have anxiety a lot. And I think a lot of that does come from centuries, even millennia, of certain groups being persecuted, chased, hunted, murdered. Do you know have you heard of epigenetics?
Yes.
Yeah. So this idea, and I might be completely brutalizing, but this idea that like memories and emotions and experiences and trauma can actually be carried through generations through your genes. And I honestly think that if they ever prove that to be true, it would make so much sense of so much of the world. I think that is what a lot of people, for instance, in Buddhism, call karma. You know, this idea
100%.
of taking things from a past life into a new life. I don't know if we're going to have time to get into this, but I grew up actually with my mum practicing Buddhism. So I practice a particular type of Buddhism for a while, and I really believe
Which
in
type?
So it's the Buddhism of Nichiren Daishonin. So it's like a kind of lay Buddhism that came out of Japan, and is, I suppose, relatively new to some of the others, but it's less about kind of quiet meditation and enlightenment and more about being out there in the world, trying to make a difference. That's a whole other podcast probably. But we do believe in karma, right? And this law of cause and effect. So any cause you put out in the world, you can expect to have some kind of effect based on it. And Buddhists do believe in reincarnation. I love the idea of it, but the skeptic in me doesn't necessarily. If I can't see it, then I won't fully believe in it. But I do think that this idea of, we pass on through our genes to our next of kin, our experiences and our trauma. I think for me that is reincarnation, because I mean we are, the cells in the body are physically being reincarnated all the time. I mean, reincarnate is not the word, but refreshed, created, but the genetics are kind of stay the same, right? So I do think, I'm someone who does suffer quite a lot from anxiety and a bit of hypochondria, and there's no real reason for me to have that. And a lot of my family do. And I think it's because there were not very long ago people in our family who were literally being hunted to death and were constantly in fight or flight, or mostly flight mode. And it doesn't take a lot to trigger that in me, or for it just to come up. And I think that could be true not just of Jewish people, but anyone who suffers from anxiety. There's something in there that's whether a trauma in their life that they've led or the life that their ancestors have led that kind of floats on through the generations, basically.
Yeah, I love everything you've just said. I'm a huge believer that this is what got me onto the whole thing about generational trauma. Because there's one thing that's just, my parents have, I'm not saying mine, but just saying like someone's parents have psychological issues. Therefore, the children are more likely to have psychological issues because they see the parent, like environmentally seeing them do it and like, okay, true, that's probably more likely anyway. But I also believe our body is pretty much like a hard drive, and everything that you experience is stored in some way or another. And there's a brilliant documentary called Motion. And it basically talks about how each of our organs stores different emotions. And this is like, I can't remember it exactly. I don't want to bastardize it, but I think it's proved or very close to being proved. Like, for example, the ones I remember is that anger is stored in the liver. So an excess of anger in the body, unprocessed anger, will lead to liver problems, which makes sense because of the more alcohol you drink, after a certain amount of time, you'll end up getting angry. A lot of people will, because it's unprocessed anger in there, and grief comes in the lungs. So, for example, old people, when their partners die or animals die, they have a much higher chance of pulmonary issues. Then there's a few other, the other organs, I can't remember which ones are which, but these emotions are stored there. And it makes sense because what are emotions? Emotions are certain reactions within us. What are reactions? Chemicals, hormones, neuromodulators, all these different things. Those are all produced in different places within the body. So it makes sense that if a certain experience happens to you, let's just call them chemicals within inside you, certain chemicals will be being produced, which will aid in that emotion. So it makes sense that emotion would have some sort of lingering effect, in the same way that the easiest way for me to conceptualize a lot of things is like training your muscles. You go to the gym, you make little tears in your muscle, and they will get stronger. And then if you stop training, your muscles will go down a bit. But then when you start again, that memory's still there. So it's very quickly to go up again. It's the same with the emotions processing in your body, that if you don't process them, you'll end up with certain different ailments in your body. Stress can cause tons of different illnesses. You can cause your skin to come out in rashes. It can cause acne. It can cause, problems with your heart, problems with your breathing, everything. That's just from stress. And I believe that within our genes, our genetics and our DNA, things are stored. And then like depending on the state of the man at the time of conception, I believe that the physical state and the balance of chemicals and hormones and everything in the body, that will have an impact on the sperm. Out of the millions of sperm, that will have an impact on the sperm, which is the one that's propelled forwards and has the energy. And then the woman will have her egg, which the egg that will have grown will have also been a manifestation of her physical state at the time of when the egg is growing and being released. And then when the baby is actually conceived, then it's growing in the woman. And then all of the woman's experience and what she's consuming, what she's seeing, everything, that's shaping how the baby's growing. It's shaping which genes are turned on and off. But, the main idea between epigenetics at the moment and things that they're trying is that to being able to manually turn on and off certain genes. Like, for example, there's a gene that we have in our body, which means that if this gene were turned on, we wouldn't need to consume vitamin C. Animals don't need to consume vitamin C. At some point we didn't, but for whatever reason, that was evolved out of us. Now we must consume vitamin C or we'll get scurvy. But that can be turned back on. But if that's turned back on, then what does that do? Why has that been turned off in the first place? But maybe you have a gene which is causing you more levels of anxiety. Probably there's loads of genes which are doing it, but they can be turned off. But then what's that going to do to you? Yeah. And it's this is the whole epigenetics thing, which I think is super fascinating, but super scary.
Yeah, well, yeah. So we start sort of genetically engineering humans and things like that. Kind of gets interesting. But then, it's funny when you look at stuff like that, because it's well, there must be a reason why we have this quest for that knowledge, and we are going down that route of the tech tree. There must be something we're seeking and searching. And I suppose, even though it feels unnatural, the fact that we as humans have evolved to the point to be exploring those things and changing those things, I guess, in essence, makes it natural because we are human. So yeah, it's I think some people have the same discussions, right, about kind of AI and robots, and do we just upload our consciousness to a computer and escape this kind of meat wagon that we carry around, and we can live for however long we need to as robots, or just in a computer. This is getting really fringe now. Yeah, it's but I really feel that this idea of emotions and those kind of really raw things that you sometimes can't explain that you feel are more than just a mental thing, but they're actually encoded deep within you and in your genetics, and and I think also can be potentially changed in the lifetime that you have now. You could make steps to change those things. But I do, we are an accumulation of all our ancestors' sort of hopes, dreams, worries, good times, etc., etc. I believe in that for sure.
And I think that we are the final product of that whole family line, but we will continue with all the negative parts of our family line until you get the consciousness to realize, wait a minute, I'm fucked up in this way, but let's try stop that. And I think that now we're at the stage where all the information we could possibly need about pretty much everything is available. So if you want to, you can change your life and you can cure yourself for free, effectively. Whereas that would never have happened before. So it's there's concepts within different parts of spirituality that relate to this, and many different traditions have got different versions of it, but it's the generation keeps going and the shit will keep happening and keep repeating itself until there's someone that says no and breaks the chain and kind of starts then their own new chain. And of course that person will end up having their own shit, but you're breaking the chain of this previous shit that's going on that really you're why do I feel these things? Why am I randomly feeling all these weird emotions, or fear of failure, or these stupid things? It's that has no logical base within, it's not like you were molested when you were a child and that's caused all these problems, or some concrete things have happened. It's just these things are within you for no actual reason, really. It's about undoing them. But I think it's so cool. I think it's so cool to be at this stage where you can do it. And I think that now more than ever, it's important to look back to the ancient texts. And, the things you're mentioning about karma, reincarnation, they've explained all of these things in many texts, different religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity. But they did not explain it in a way that we were ready for. And now science is trying to prove it in a way that people will accept because it's scientifically. So, I think that karma will be scientifically proven through things like epigenetics and the storage of emotion stuff. I say, okay, they were calling this karma. What karma actually means in our modern day scientific terms that we're happy with is this plus this equals this minus CO2 plus 59 something. And then people are like, oh, okay. And then it moves on, and like reincarnation, this is what reincarnation is. But I think that they are all things. People wouldn't have spent thousands of years like studying, in their way, dedicating their lives to these things that don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, what you're touching on there is one of my favorite, I guess it's still somewhat fringe science theories, is that. So, you might know that they've been discovering recently evidence of civilizations that go way, way back in time than we ever considered before. And
have you seen Ancient Apocalypse?
Wait, is that the more recent one that came out?
That's the more recent
Hancock
Netflix,
one?
Graham Hancock, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean,
epic.
Some of the stuff he comes out with I find a bit weird, but I do really like this theory that they found this place in Turkey, is it Göbekli Tepe or something, where it's like it precedes the pyramids by like 10,000 years, but people refute it by saying, well, there's no evidence of any like human existence there, etc., etc. But there's one thing that kind of keeps me awake at night sometimes, is this idea that's like, well, what if they did have really, really advanced what we might call technology that was just down a completely different tree, and it could have been more like nature based. They could have even been different types of human, or if you want to go even further, like they might have even been not from this planet and had come here, and then that sort of we've somehow evolved from that. Aliens, but it's this. The way I think about it is like, if our species was very suddenly wiped out, well, not even suddenly, if we were just wiped out over the next 100 years, almost entirely, and over that time, our buildings, our infrastructure crumbled over millennia, but somewhere buried in a bunker somewhere, there is a working server, like which is submitting like a Wi-Fi signal. But in 5,000 years' time, how would you even begin to conceive of the concept of Wi-Fi if you didn't know about it? That there is a signal floating in the air that with the right elements of technology that you need to invent, you can tap into that signal and check what the football score was in 2022, January 15th or whatever. You wouldn't. So in the same respect, how can we possibly know for sure that these people that potentially existed 10,000 years before the Egyptians and in the pyramids had some form of technology that we just because of the decisions we've taken have absolutely no concept of.
Yeah.
We just know what we know, right? Because that's what we've grown up with. And that kind of thing just like it spins me round and round and round, because the possibilities and the idea that we only use certain senses, and there's some animals that use like 10, 15 different senses, so there's frequencies of color and sound and everything that we can't perceive.
Sight as well, like seeing ultraviolet and things like that.
Like we can only, reality is perception, right? So it's this that I love consuming all that Graham Hancock stuff about these ancient civilizations and things. It's absolutely it's fascinating to me massively.
I think about it all the fucking time, and I absolutely love it as well. And one thing that you mentioned again, about going down a different route, and it's like, to me that's just totally logical, that if humans have been around for a million years or whatever it is, that things will have been tried and tested, and if there's some sort of cataclysm that's destroyed stuff every so often, which is the theories think there are, a storm or a flood or whatever, or an ice age, all these things. And sea levels have changed. Probably there's loads of stuff dumped around everywhere, and, cities that are under the sea and things like that. And even, discovering like in the jungle places that haven't been seen, and even underground, like in Turkey in Ancient Apocalypse, when they have under Cappadocia, they've got these massive underground cities. Like something like between 50 and 100 of these underground cities in Turkey, which is nuts. But yeah, like technologies using, I think that they would have used more vibrations, sound, light, and senses that we don't think of. I've heard theories that they used to be able to move rock with sound vibrations. So that's like, I've heard a theory about that for the pyramid, which I thought was really cool. Obviously, I want that to be true.
Yeah,
but
well, I'm trying to remember that. Again, I can barely remember what it was. I think it might have been in that Ancient Apocalypse show where they were talking about how they think that civilization found a way simply by using some kind of numerical system to create an element of kinetic energy or something like that. Is this ringing any bells?
It is. I'm not sure if it was in Ancient Apocalypse.
I can't remember what it was now, but it was just like, it sounded like magic.
Sacred geometry.
It might have been sacred geometry. But yeah, just all stuff like that is, we are so sure that we're like the most technologically advanced because everything we know ourselves is new to us because everything's always new, right? But how could we be so sure? Yeah, like millions of years ago, there wasn't a race of something here that had a completely different tech tree that was way beyond our own capacity. In the same way that if they came here now, they probably wouldn't know what the hell the internet was. They couldn't possibly conceive of it. Maybe they had another way of communicating broadly across the planet that we hadn't thought of.
Yeah, one thing I think is really cool that I've heard about recently is there's a team that's using vibrations. So I can't remember what the documentary was, but basically it starts off by saying that if you get a wine glass and you rub your finger around the ring of the wine glass, it'll emit a certain frequency. If you get a pitchfork, a tuning fork, to emit that same frequency, it will then reverberate and the wine glass will smash because it basically the vibration matches and it just keeps going faster and faster and faster. The same way that if you get feedback on a microphone, it goes like, and then there's the example of that, and then there's this bridge called like the vibrating bridge or something, or the collapsing bridge, the big like long massive car carrying bridge. And so everything has its own frequency that it vibrates at, and this was vibrating at its own little frequency, and the wind somehow managed to hit the same frequency, and then it started going like this, matching it, and just like collapsed just from the wind like that. And then these scientists started trying to destroy cells, and they basically spent years and years and years like trying all these different frequencies to destroy these cancer cells. They managed to find it. I think it was the 11,000 hertz with the 13th harmonic. So that's 13 times 11,000. They fired those two together and they could destroy cancer cells.
Wow.
With no, it's only the cancer cells which will get destroyed. And it's only probably one very specific type of cancer.
Yeah.
But all that means is that given enough time, they'll be able to find the frequencies of all the different tumors and cancer cells and destroy those.
And that's fascinating. I mean, that's just like bring it back to the Buddhism thing. There's one of the core elements of this practice that I do is this idea that everything is constantly vibrating to some kind of frequency, whether it's a solid thing like a table, or if it's the air around you, or it's the cells in your own body. And we believe that through doing the daily practice, which is a form of meditation, but it's chanting. So you're chanting these like Japanese words kind of somewhat rhythmically and repetitively, which in it of itself creates a vibration within you. You feel that if you just like you would if you were talking. And Buddhists talk a lot about sort of being like in rhythm with the universe, which sounds very hippy dippy, but what that really means is kind of what you're saying is sometimes you just feel like everything is going for you or going against you that day, and we call that in rhythm or out of rhythm. And it's kind of linked a little bit to the science that you were saying. Is this like if you can kind of tap into that vibration that we all share on certain frequencies, I don't think that's why I don't think it's like it's a God up there that's dictating this stuff. I think we have it all within us and within the universe and the physical world. It's just we don't really know how to explain it or to harness it, I guess. But bringing it back to the arts, I'm going to segue back to the art stuff. But that's what's so beautiful about what we do, comedy, spoken word, music is that it kind of transcends all that, right? Because it's about creating human connection in this fucked up world that we can't really explain, and we're still trying to explore and discover how things work scientifically. It's something, for some reason, that we respond to, and watching another human in a room share something artistic that we love, and it's maybe we will be able to explain that through science at some point. The hormones it releases in your brain to do it or to watch it, but that's a really kind of beautiful thing about getting up there and doing this is like, so I used to DJ a lot, and the biggest buzz I ever would get would be like finding a track in a record store, new or old, but that excitement of like, I can't wait to drop this on the dance floor because I think people are going to go nuts to this, and I'm going to watch them like throw their arms in the air and dance and do that. And it was like, I didn't make the song, but I am in some way controlling the environment by playing that song at that moment and connecting with people in that moment. And I realized after doing comedy, only a few weeks in, I was getting the exact same emotions from telling a joke and eliciting like a laughter response from people, because it's like, it's something I thought of, I wrote down, I said out loud, and people heard it and they involuntarily laughed. And it's this connection you can create with people in that moment, which is just, it's that for me is like, that's like magic.
Yeah it is very cool. And like even the words, since I started thinking more about vibrations, even like we use the word I like his vibe, and it's like, or in poetry people use the word, that resonated with me. And it's like, even the language we're using is saying like, that resonated with me, that what you're saying there, your little buzzing that you're sending out, your little vibrations making me vibrate in a certain little way, that's making me feel something like that. It's literally, maybe it is literally resonating with me, and I'm resonating in a different way because of your words that are like.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same way that we use devices like alliteration or onomatopoeia or all those things, or or even just the order in which we put words in the things that you were saying in our poems or our comedy. It makes a huge, just moving the word a couple of words forward or back can completely change the entire impact that a joke has on people. It's so interesting how not just the language, but the sound of the language when you're saying something, or even the negative space in between what you're saying as well. It all has this weird chemical impact on people's brains that either makes them laugh or doesn't make them laugh.
Yeah, I find that with like, especially with rhyme, like I struggle to write anything that doesn't rhyme, but rhyme, it just makes me feel so satisfied. It's like a harmonic in music, that it's just right. It matches it, and in a harmonic in music is literally vibration. It's a factor of that. It's a factor of the amount of vibration of that. So I guess that rhyme in some weird mathematical way probably is a factor of that as well. And even when I hear rap or something in another language that I don't understand, when I hear the rhyme in it, I'm like, oh yeah, and I'm like, yeah, and it brings me that. I'm like, oh yeah, this makes me feel so nice, even though I have no idea what they're saying.
Yeah,
just these two words that are rhyming together, I'm like, oh, that feels so satisfying.
Yeah, there must be like literature on this out there somewhere. I now think I really want to read some books about why things like rhyming and harmonies like actually make us feel that satisfaction. Like, people must have studied this. It must be out there. I don't know if you've got any recommendations.
I don't know yet. No, I think that this is a topic where you would probably be better off going to like ancient literature. I would say that they probably know all about it. And now it's the type of stuff where it's starting to get studied again now, because it's somehow more relevant now. I don't know why, but people that are studying these type of things are thinking, okay, let's look back at this ancient literature and let's take something from it and let's figure out why these people were doing that, because they're probably right.
Yeah.
It's like even things like prayer, chanting that you're saying, like regardless of the fact of if there's a God or not, unimportant, those practices, meditation, gratitude, prayer, chanting, those all have studied benefits to you, strong benefits. And so it's like, pray, doesn't matter who you pray to.
Yeah.
Practice gratitude, like say, I am so grateful for this, and try and actually feel it. And your life will improve.
Yeah.
Regardless of who you're praying to, or you don't talk to anyone. It's like these practices within. And if you do it in a group of people, that experience is heightened and the results are heightened. For some reason, doing it in a group it gives you a stronger response. I don't know why. And that's, I suppose, why these communities and religions start.
Yeah.
So I think we'll wrap it up now. Before we end, do you have anything that you'd like to plug? Where can people find you?
So yeah, it was like a weird segue to go from. We went deep there, man. I listened to your podcast before. I was like, I know you get deep, but we went like really into the reads. I enjoyed that. So yeah, listen, I post most stuff about my comedy and life, etc., on my Instagram. So my Instagram handle is jregal. That's Regal Junior. But like I need a new Instagram handle. I shouldn't have to explain it. So jregal JNR, or just search James Regal on Instagram, or like the show specifically. So there's Roast Battle Barcelona on Instagram as well. I also do a fun kind of speed dating based comedy show.
I got into that by accident.
Yeah, you were really good on that though, actually. I think you ended up making a friend through that.
I did make a friend, yeah.
So
my girlfriend wasn't so happy about me going speed dating. But I thought it was called Lollyamorous.
Lollyamorous, yeah.
So then I came and I was like, oh, this will just be some sort of like comedy show thing. Then like, I'll put your name on a little ticket. And I was like, why? And they're like, a speed date. And I was like, oh, but like a joke. They're like, no. I was like, I've got a girlfriend. They're like, yeah, it doesn't matter. I was like, fine.
Yeah.
First person to get pulled, like, come on. I was like, for fuck's sake.
It's fine. Look, it's obviously based around speed dating and romance, but it's really just a fun way of getting two people on stage who've never met before to like talk to each other, and then we interview them after the minute's up to find out more about them. And sometimes we never know where the conversation is going to go. Like we talk about love lives and dating, but sometimes it just goes off in completely random directions, depending what it is. So yeah, that's super fun. That's the second Friday of every month at the Clubhouse, and the roast battle we do like 2 or 3 shows a month in various venues and things. So
okay, awesome. And before we end, as is tradition, what are your words of wisdom for our listeners?
Oh, my words of wisdom. Wasn't prepared for this, Connor.
Yeah, I don't let anyone get prepared.
Fine. I think just don't be, can I swear on this?
Yeah.
Don't be a cunt. Like, we've talked a lot about left and right, extreme this, extreme that. For me, it's all one part of the same thing. It's just like, if I could reframe modern sort of dialogue on these things, I'd stop talking in terms of left and right, and I'd be like, let's have the not cunts and the cunts, and let's all just try and be on the not cunt side a little bit.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd say. Just be nice.
Try and be nice. That is some great wisdom there from James. Also a very cool surname.
Regal. Yeah, people think it's a stage name, and it's not. It's my actual name.
Yeah, well, you're very lucky, Daz. I think that can be the mark of a great performer, when you're born with a good stage name. You see, I realized recently my name's Connor Monaghan, and I'm like, Connor Monaghan, that rhymes, Connor Mona. And I'm like, no wonder I'm a rhyming poet.
Doesn't just rhyme, it sounds nice to say Connor Monaghan. It's like, yeah, that's cool. No, I think we won't get too into this because we're wrapping up, but I think Regal is probably a made up / adapted surname, given that my family gave itself when they were running away from whichever horrible group of people were trying to hunt them down. We originate from kind of somewhere in Eastern Europe. So yeah, I don't think I like the idea that my family, maybe when they first came to England, thought, what's a British sounding name? Let's call ourselves Regal. And I just like, that would be something I would do. It's kind of a bit pretentious. And so I like to think they just sort of came up with like what they thought would be a cool British name. But I don't think that's the truth. I think it's just like adapted from like probably Mikhailov or something like that. But yeah.
Interesting. And one last thing, I have a little present.
Oh. I just say, before I came on, I got sent a physical invitation for this show. It's amazing. Oh my God, I got a t-shirt as well.
Yeah.
Should I show it to the camera? Oh, you're wearing one.
Yeah.
That is, hang on, where's the camera? It's there. Look at that. That is gorgeous.
And it's got the back as well.
Actually really need some new t-shirts as well.
Oh,
so you've
good.
done me a massive favour there.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for having you. It's been awesome. I've loved the little rabbit holes that we went down on.
Yeah.
You never know what you're going to get into, and you come on the Quest for Wisdom podcast. So check your post box, people, and see who gets a letter. No, I'm not just going to send them out randomly, sadly. Maybe I will.
I think you should. I think that'd be more exciting. It's just to open your post one day and be like, oh, I'm going on a podcast next week. That'd be awesome.
Here's a first class plane ticket. Like,
Yeah.
no, sorry, I can't afford that, but one day maybe, yes. All right. Farewell, everybody. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Quest for Wisdom podcast with your host, Connor Monaghan. If you enjoyed the episode and would like to support the show, then please like it, subscribe, and leave a review on whichever platform you are using. This small act is a massive help and is hugely appreciated. You can find more information about all of our guests on thequestforwisdom.com and follow us at The Quest for Wisdom on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for exciting updates. We also have a Patreon account for anyone who would like to contribute towards the running of the show. Finally, I would like to thank the Comedy Clubhouse in Barcelona for allowing us to record here and for their ongoing support. If you are ever in Barcelona, make sure to check it out for daily shows of comedy and performance art in English. Farewell for now.